Huawei A Theory. Hello, my name is Eva and welcome to Jones Moans. I worked at BT's research and development site between 1996 and 2008. In the last few years I was there, I worked on a project called 21st Century Network, 21CN. This was a massive overhaul of the UK's communications network. 21CN introduced Huawei, a Chinese telecoms company, onto the core of the network. The introduction of Huawei has since become controversial. In 2019, President Trump announced that he would not allow the US to connect to any network using Huawei equipment due to security implications. In my previous videos, I have detailed how and why Huawei were introduced onto the UK network. This is from a business level. I have also detailed how and why I left BT. To save you watching nearly an hour's worth of videos, I've summarised my last few years at BT. So I officially objected to Huawei being introduced onto the UK network while I was working on the 21CN project. This was because two Huawei engineers had broken into a 21CN test area where I worked and were caught taking photos of Cisco routers. Cisco is an American telecoms company that supplies BT. My objection to the introduction of Huawei onto the UK network was based purely on the knowledge of the break-in. There were many rumours flying around internally at BT regarding stealing intellectual property. At the time, I thought these were merely rumours. After this break-in, Huawei was introduced onto the live network. After Huawei were introduced onto the live network, BT began an initiative called Managing the Tail. This forced many people onto a poor performance review, and people lost their jobs through managing the tail. After managing the tail was introduced, a redundancy package was offered. The conditions of the redundancy package were so limiting that only a handful of employees will have been able to succeed in leaving under the scheme. People were forced to leave under the Managing the Tail initiative. I managed to leave with a redundancy package in early 2008. From 2008, I didn't hear anything about Huawei until 2019, when President Trump started to object to the Chinese company supplying kit for the UK 5G network. At this point, I started to look at old news articles on Huawei and President Trump, and it started to become clear that by 2019, Huawei had alienated most other telecoms companies apart from BT. I found articles that described how some countries had cancelled Huawei contracts because of the behaviour of some of their engineers, and it did look like they made a habit of breaking into buildings that contained other suppliers' equipment. I also found reports on a lawsuit brought about by Cisco for stealing intellectual property. I think at one point Huawei did admit to stealing, and this is when the penny finally dropped for me. Well, it was more of a crash, really. I remember thinking about work I was doing around 2002. At this time I headed up a team that was managing internet abuse, or it's now called cybercrime. At some point while I was managing this team, a new security manager arrived, and this person's first task was to investigate a Cisco router that had been stolen out of a BT building somewhere. The reason BT knew about it was because the router was for sale on eBay. I did question the utility of this new manager's task. Stealing a router would be one thing, selling it was another. The only people that would want a Cisco router in the UK at this time would be BT, I think. When I questioned a few other people where I was working, as we had ex-field engineers working for us as well, it turned out that that it wasn't just a router that had been stolen, and it's, some people said Cisco routers were often being stolen from BT premises. This, as I say, was about 2002, I think. Now, part of my theory is that Huawei was nicking stuff to order well before 21CN got going. Another thing Huawei has been accused of stealing was training information. Now, Cisco has a very structured training program. When you look at Huawei's training packages, they're pretty much identical to Cisco's, apart from the logo on the front. So here's my theory. I think that BT made a deal with Huawei before the 21CN project. Huawei started stealing whatever they could, equipment and documentation, to allow them to quickly get up to speed as a viable competitor to Cisco. This allowed them to be considered as a supplier for 21CN. Once Huawei were deployed on the core of the UK network, Cisco would no longer have had a monopoly and could no longer charge BT a premium for equipment, training, support and maintenance. When Managing the Tower initiative was introduced, BT would not have been concerned about losing highly paid high achievers working on the data network, as Huawei could provide cheaper support. Remember, this is just a theory. Now, when the global recession started in 2009, BT would have been forced to make a lot of cutbacks, and I would assume Huawei's equipment, training and support would have been favoured over the more expensive Cisco kit. By the time Donald Trump became president in 2016, Huawei may have been the favoured supplier on the core of the UK network down to pricing. My theory is that after the recession in 2009, BT was partly running its network using stolen property to keep costs down. There would have been some Cisco kit. I don't think BT would have had the front to cancel the Cisco contract. My theory is that anything supplied by Huawei was nicked and was an exact copy of anything that Cisco supplied. BT may even have paid Huawei engineers based in China to remotely support the core of the UK network as another cost-cutting exercise to save on staffing bills at BT. In my next video, I'll be looking into who in authority may have known about this. Thank you for watching.